112-485 by the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Markey, on which further proceedings were postponed and which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 11, printed in House Report number 112-485, offered by Mr. Markey of Massachusetts.
Recorded vote has been requested. Those in favor of request for recorded vote will rise and be counted. Sufficient number having arisen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their vote by electronic device. This is a 2-minute vote.
Ed Markey, a Democrat of Massachusetts, has an amendment that would delay the development of the new long-range nuclear-capable bomber by 10 years and reducing the funding in the bill by $292 million. One more amendment vote will follow this, and a more amendment debate later on this evening on the House floor and into Friday as well. The rule for the defense authorization bill allows for 142 amendments to be considered. A big bunch of those were considered in what they call in block, 20 of them as a matter of fact. And Peter Kasperowicz of the Hill, following the action for the Hill, wrote earlier this evening that the House approved its first slate of amendments to the Defense Authorization Act by including one that would allow the President to remove commercial satellites and components from the munitions list. Under the language from Representative Adam Smith, the President could remove satellites and components from the munitions list if he submits a report saying this move would not pose an unacceptable risk to U.S. national security. So 20 amendments were approved at once there in that en bloc movement as debate began earlier this afternoon.
On this vote,
Mr. Ellison. Mr. Ellison votes aye.
On this vote, the yeas are 112, the nays are 308. The amendment is not agreed to. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on amendment number 12, printed in House Report 112-485 by the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Polis, in which further proceedings were postponed, on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 12, printed in House Report number 112-485, offered by Mr. Polis of Colorado.
Recorded vote has been requested. Those in favor of request for recorded vote will rise and be counted. Sufficient number having arisen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members record their votes by electronic device. This is a 2-minute vote.
This should be the last amendment vote in this series. This is an amendment that would reduce the amount for the ground-based mid-course missile defense system by $403 million and would require those funds be used only for deficit reduction. It's a 2-minute vote, and the House again will move on next to debating a couple of motions to instruct conferees on the transportation bill conference report, but more amendments still to come on the defense authorization bill. This is an authorization bill. It's not the spending bill. This authorizes the spending of $643 billion for defense programs in the next fiscal year, 3.6 more than the administration requested, $8 billion more than the cap that was set during last year's debt ceiling and budget control debate. The bill would provide for $6 billion to purchase F-29 F-35 Joint Strike Fighters. It would also require the establishment of a new missile interceptor facility on the East Coast that the Pentagon does not want. It would prohibit Afghanistan forces from guarding U.S. facilities. It would also prohibit the transfer of detainees from Guantanamo to the U.S. and restrict the president's ability to decommission nuclear weapons, some of the items in the defense authorization bill. Again, more amendment debate later on this evening and lots more on Friday as well. This on the same day that the Appropriations Committee approved the defense spending bill. That they approved a draft defense spending bill for the fiscal year 2013, providing $608 billion for the Pentagon. The CQ writes that proposed spending bill would exceed the spending caps for defense included in last year's deficit reduction law, setting up the need for negotiations later this year with Senate defense appropriators who are expected to adhere to that cap. So last vote in this series. You're watching live House coverage here on C-SPAN.
On this vote, the yeas are 165, the nays are 252, and the amendment is not agreed to. What purpose the gentleman from California rise?
Move that the committee now rise.
Question is on the motion that the committee do now rise. As many as are in favor will signify by saying aye. Those opposed say no. Pin the chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Accordingly, the committee rises.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Speaker, the Committee on the Whole House on the State of the Union, having had under consideration H.R. 4310, directs me to report that it has come to no resolution thereon.
Chair of the Committee of the Whole House of the State on the State of the Union reports that the committee has under consideration H.R. 4310 and has come to no resolution thereon. Enrolled. The chair lays before the House an enrolled bill.
H.R. 2072, an act to reauthorize the Export-Import Bank of the United States and for other purposes.
What purpose does the gentleman from Georgia rise?
Speaker, I have a motion at the desk.
The clerk will report the motion.
Motion to instruct conferees on H.R. 4348 offered by Mr. Barrow of Georgia. Mr. Barrow of Georgia moves that the managers on the part of the House at the conference on the disagreeing votes of the two houses on the Senate amendment to the bill, H.R. 4348, be instructed to insist on Title II of the House bill regarding approval of the Keystone XL pipeline.
Pursuant to Clause 7 of Rule 22, the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Barrow, and the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Upton, will each control 30 minutes. The gentleman from California rise.
We have regular order.
House will be in order.
Mr. Speaker, we cannot hear you. I don't know if your microphone's on.
I don't know where the switch is. For what purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to inquire whether on the Republican side of the aisle, whoever is claiming time to speak on this motion is in fact opposed to the motion.
Mr. Speaker, the House isn't in order.
The House will be in order. The House will be in order. Is the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Upton, claiming the time in opposition or in favor of?
I would like to claim the time on the Republican side in support of the Barrow resolution.
Mr. Speaker?
Pursuant to Clause 7B2 of Rule 22, the gentleman from Georgia, therefore, will control 20 minutes. The gentleman from Michigan will control 20 minutes. And Mr. Waxman will control 20 minutes. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Barrow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized for as much time as he may consume.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of a motion to instruct the conferees on the Surface Transportation Extension Act of 2012 to insist on Title II of that Act, which contains the provisions of the North American Energy Access Act, essentially calling for the completion of the Keystone XL pipeline. Mr. Speaker, in these times of increasing security threats and economic uncertainty, the construction of the Keystone XL pipeline represents a win-win for America's national security and economic interests.
Regular order.
Gentleman from Michigan is correct. Gentleman from Georgia deserves to be heard. I'd ask members to please take their seats. Members to take their conversations out of the chamber. Gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
I thank the gentleman and I thank the Speaker. Mr. Speaker, not only will this project create thousands of much-needed jobs, it'll secure America's energy future by reducing our dependence on foreign oil. By working with our neighbors to the north on an effort that ramps up our domestic energy production, we'll better protect families here at home from the effects of energy market insecurity caused by political and economic troubles in other parts of the world. Estimates vary, but the most conservative estimates predict that this job project will create 13,000 new construction jobs and an additional 7,000 manufacturing jobs. But that's not all, Mr. Speaker. Let's put this in perspective. The Keystone XL pipeline, when operating at capacity, will be able to move 840,000 barrels of oil per day into our domestic refining capacity on the domestic production market. And put that in perspective, America imports about 8.4 million barrels per day. The carrying capacity of this pipeline alone is 10% of America's net national daily imports. America consumes 20 million barrels a day. The carrying capacity of this pipeline represents 5% of current U.S. daily consumption of oil products. The U.S. daily produces about 8.8 million barrels a day. This pipeline will have the capacity to bring in 10% in addition, more, what we're already producing on a daily basis here in this country. It also represents approximately a one-third increase in the total daily imports from Canada. If that wasn't enough, the 840,000 this can carry comes real close to the 900,000 barrels a day that we import every day from Venezuela. I don't know about anybody else, There ain't any policy in this country that private enterprise is going to lead the way and pay for that can cause us to tell the folks in Venezuela, goodbye, we'll see you later. That's good policy, good economic policy, good energy policy for this country. Mr. Speaker, we've held hearings on this matter. We've engaged the public and energy experts. We've checked and rechecked for environmental soundness and debated for hours on the floor of this House. After all that, what we're left with is a very well-vetted and I think worthwhile project that's ready to start construction. For the jobs and for the energy security, the folks I represent want us to get moving on this. We have an opportunity to make that happen in the Highway Bill conference that's currently underway. I encourage my colleagues to support my motion to instruct so we can send that message loud and clear to the conferees. With that, Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Georgia reserves. Gentleman from Michigan.
Mr. Speaker, I would yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized for as much time as may consume.
Mr. Speaker, this amendment is really about jobs in the economy. The President, you'll remember, in January, in a national address, said he would do whatever it takes to create U.S. jobs. That's what this bill does. It creates, by just about everybody's estimate, 20,000 direct jobs, more than 100,000 indirect jobs. And I would note that under Ed Whitfield's leadership, the chairman of the Energy and Power Subcommittee, we went through regular order on this bill last year. We held hearings, we held a subcommittee markup, we had a full committee markup, and last summer we passed it on the House floor by almost a 2-to-1 margin, obviously bipartisan. Mr. Speaker, we consume about 18 or 19 million barrels of oil every day. We produce only 8 to 9 million barrels a day. This is a pipeline that will bring us 800,000 barrels a day from our friends, the Canadians. We've waited 3 years. You'll remember that Secretary of State Hillary Clinton said in October of 2010 that she was inclined to support this. And in August of last year, she said, we'll have the review done before the end of the year. It's not been done yet. And even though this House passed the bill by a significant margin, the Senate did not act. And that's why this bill has been attached to a couple different bills, and now as part of the Highway Bill. And I support the gentleman's instruction to the conferees to include this. The route has been rerouted through Nebraska. They now support this new route. We have spent billions of dollars at our refineries across the country trying to get ready for this new source of oil coming from our friends, the Canadians. So what happens if we continue to say no? The Canadians are for sure going to still produce this. They're still going to mine the oil sands up in Alberta, but it's not going to come here. It's going to go to China. China is prepared to spend with the Canadians literally billions of dollars to send it there, of which none of it will come back to the United States. That's not the right answer. No, it's not. That's why it's part of this bill to provide us, it's not only a national security issue as part of the Highway Bill, but it's also a way that we will know that we'll have a steady source of supply. Now, let me just make one more point. Today, we import from Canada 2.6 million barrels of oil every single day. 1 million barrels of that already is oil sands. In my home state of Michigan, the Marathon Refinery outside of Detroit has spent $2.2 billion expanding their refinery, preparing for oil sands, not from Alberta, not from this pipe, not from this part of Canada, but other parts, of which that oil sands then will be part of what we consume here in the United States. 1 million barrels of the 2.6 million that Canada sends us every day is oil sands. What is the problem with expanding that by another 800,000 barrels a day that will produce American jobs and allow us to have less reliance on friends like Venezuela and folks in the Middle East, that we can use our best friend Canada to help us provide this oil to the United States. So I support the gentleman's instruction. I hope that it will pass when we have the vote tomorrow, and I would ask unanimous consent that the balance of my time be reserved and under the direction of Mr. Whitfield, the subcommittee chair of the Energy and Power Subcommittee.
Without objection. Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from California.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in opposition to this instruction. First of all, whatever your views are on the pipeline coming out of Canada, this is not the place for this issue to be brought up, because what this provision would do would be to short-circuit the decision-making and mandate approval of the pipeline, and it doesn't belong in the transportation bill. We see this over and over again. Our Republican colleagues like to take bills and then hold them hostage to get what they want. They wanted to get the pipeline approved, so they mandated the President had to make a decision within 60 days in a previous bill. The President didn't want it. He said, okay, I'll sign it, but then said he's not ready to make a decision in 60 days. So this provision doesn't require him to make a decision. It tells him, this is going to be decided. This is going to be done. That's what we used to call earmarks. And in fact, this is an earmark, a special interest earmark. Now, on its merits, this legislative earmark for TransCanada makes no sense. Mandating approval of the Keystone XL pipeline might help jobs in other countries. It might create more jobs in Canada. But when the Republicans tell us it's going to produce so many jobs in the United States, they're not buying a pipeline, they're buying a pipe dream. A green light for Keystone will lead to massive imports of transmission pipe manufactured overseas. The American people will bear all the risks, and Big Oil will reap all the rewards of this pipeline. We're going to get more carbon pollution, more dangerous oil spills, land seizures by a foreign company, and higher oil prices in the Midwest. Big Oil gets the ability to extract more profits from the Midwest, a conduit for exporting tar sands products to China, because that's where this oil is going to go. Because it's an international transport of oil from these tar sands from Canada to the United States, going down to the Gulf, it can then be put on steamers and sent to China. And there's no restriction against it. We have open markets, and China would be delighted to take that oil. But it's not going to benefit us, it's going to benefit China. Now, President Obama listened to the differing views of American citizens, and he made a responsible decision. He said he was not going to approve this pipeline through the ecologically fragile Sand Hills area of Nebraska, but the State Department would consider an alternative route, and Nebraska is still looking for another route that would be acceptable to the state. The President is making sure he has all the information he needs to make the right decision. This provision takes the opposite approach. It gives a pipeline an unprecedented legislative earmark. It doesn't give discretion. It requires the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to approve the pipeline immediately, even though we don't know what route it will take through Nebraska. I think we ought to recognize these tar sands in Canada are very, very dirty, and it's going to require a lot of energy to get them into an oil form that can be transported through a pipeline. The consequence of that is going to be to add more carbon emissions at a time when our planet is already suffering from global warming and extreme climate change. It would be incredibly reckless for Congress to jeopardize this critically important transportation bill by playing politics over an unrelated and extraneous provision. I urge my colleagues to reject this motion and to not put in this poison pill provision that would lead to the whole transportation being vetoed. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Altmaier.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, construction of the Keystone XL pipeline would create thousands of jobs for hardworking Americans, but it would also increase our energy independence. Canada has already confirmed its intention to build the pipeline. The only question now is whether or not our nation will benefit from the jobs, economic growth, and energy security that comes with construction of the pipeline. We cannot allow this opportunity to pass us by. The project would be developed in keeping with all environmental regulations and constructed with the safest and most advanced pipeline technology available. What's more, the Keystone Pipeline takes advantage of Canada's vast oil resources that are the second largest on the planet. The time for delay has long since passed. The House legislation would advance the approval and construction of the pipeline passed by the House on multiple occasions with bipartisan support. The Keystone Pipeline has the potential to become a viable, long-lasting, sustainable source of energy for the future. Construction of the pipeline would provide a steady source of energy for our country, decrease our reliance on volatile oil markets, and provide the certainty that comes with a steady job for tens of thousands of Americans. Mr. Speaker, the pipeline is going to be built. What's left to decide is whether Americans will benefit from it. I strongly urge the conferees on the Surface Transportation Committee to include the Keystone Pipeline in the final bill, and I look forward to working with my colleagues to continue to advance our nation's energy independence. I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Georgia reserves. Gentleman from Kentucky.
Mr. Speaker, at this time I would like to yield 4 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Terry, who is one of the primary sponsors of the Keystone Pipeline legislation, and the route of the pipeline will be going partially through his home state of Nebraska, yielding 4 minutes.
Gentleman from Nebraska is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Speaker, I rise in strong support of the gentleman from Georgia's motion to instruct conferees to support the Keystone Pipeline and the transportation bill. Let's start with a quick tutorial here. Right here, above the United States border in Canada, a couple hundred miles north of our border, lies the second or third largest current reserve of oil. Now, there's already an existing pipeline coming down through the Bakken fields, or on North Dakota. This blue dotted line is the new pipeline, the one that's of controversy now, mostly because it's the environmental left, the NRDC, and some other organizations that have come out opposed that because they don't want fossil fuel use, especially a heavier crude. Now, that's the focus of the debate. They have stated that their whole goal here is to kill this pipeline. Now, what does this pipeline do for the United States of America? Well, first of all, we have the second or third largest reserve here. This pipeline will bring 800,000 barrels per day. We've already heard from 2 different gentlemen that our country imports about 10 million barrels per day. So if we can bring 800,000 to 1 million barrels per day, that's that much less that has to be imported from a country like Venezuela. By the way, we import about 800,000 to 900,000 barrels per day from Venezuela. Maybe we can stop sending our dollars to Venezuela so they can buy military equipment from from Russia to destabilize South and Central America, which is what these dollars are doing. So it provides us a level of energy security, offsets imports into our country from countries we don't like. The bonus here is jobs. 10,000, 20,000 jobs will be created directly. And we hear statements that it won't create jobs, but I can take you to the laborers facility that has a project labor agreement in hand. I can take you to the IBEW that's got a project labor agreement in hand. I can take you to several other of our unions that have agreements ready to go if they would start building this pipeline. Now, I wanted to mention and clear up some of the misinformation that's out there regarding this pipeline in my home state of Nebraska. First of all, in the efforts that we took to get this pipeline out of the politics of the White House and into reasonable hands to get this approved. We exempted the state of Nebraska, giving them enough time to find a new route. The President ignored that provision of the bill and still used the state of Nebraska as his excuse to kill the pipeline. We're here today because the President denied their permit, said no to the Keystone Pipeline. Well, as we stand here today, this pipeline has already been rerouted, a different route chosen off of the sandhills of Nebraska. The environmental assessment is occurring as we speak here today, and it'll be done in a few months. There is no longer an excuse for the President to use to kill this new permit just recently filed by TransCanada for this pipeline. So, in review, we offset the oil we import from other countries we don't like. 30 more seconds.
An additional 1 minute.
The gentleman is recognized for additional 1 minute.
We create 20,000 jobs building this pipeline. And we have a relationship with China where we access the second or third largest reserve. And the gentleman is right. There's a pipeline that they're building to go off west so the Chinese can have access to part of this. We need this oil. Let's compliment our friends and let's pass this pipeline. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from California.
At this point, I'd like to yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, an important member of the Energy and Commerce Committee, Mr. Doyle.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in opposition to this motion to instruct. Like Mr. Barrow and many of my friends on the other side of the aisle, I support building this pipeline in a way that protects the environment and creates good American jobs, but not in the manner that this motion to instruct would have us do. I've come to the floor many times to talk about the Keystone Pipeline. Many times my concern was that we're not using enough American-made steel in this project, that a lot of what we were told initially about the steelworker jobs and the things that would be created just didn't come to materialize. But my biggest concern with this motion to instruct is we're once again talking about a 30-day timeline for approval from an agency, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, that has nothing to do with oil pipeline siting and permitting. We're asking FERC, we're tasking them with the regulation of wholesale electricity. We task them with ensuring reliability, hydropower permitting, and natural gas pipeline siting. FERC doesn't have the authority or the expertise to permit and site oil pipeline at all, and it's unrealistic to expect that they can do it in 30 days. And if FERC doesn't issue a permit in 30 days, it doesn't matter. This motion would allow the permit to be deemed as issued to build the Keystone XL pipeline, even if FERC doesn't approve a permit within 30 days. A 30-day arbitrary and rushed approval for this pipeline is not worth holding up our entire highway bill conference. The Keystone XL pipeline will be built in due time with appropriate permitting. It will create good-paying jobs and strengthen our relationship with our neighbor Canada. Let's not hold up the highway bill conference that can bring even more good jobs and improved infrastructure that our country so badly needs. I urge my colleagues to vote no on this motion to instruct, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from California reserves. Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield as much time as he may consume to the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Matheson.
Gentleman from Utah is recognized for as much time as he may consume.
Well, I thank the gentleman from Georgia for offering this motion. I thank him for yielding me some time. We've heard a lot from different members out here already about what the construction of this pipeline would mean in terms of increased capacity of product coming from North American sources for U.S. oil consumption. We've heard about the jobs of the construction of the pipeline, And I'm not going to repeat all those numbers and statistics, but I did think it would be helpful to talk about a couple of the issues that have been raised about this pipeline, try to clarify some of the facts about what's going on with this type of product and this type of pipeline. You know, a lot of people think this is a brand new product. They're worried about product from oil sands. In fact, according to the Congressional Research Service, there are already 5 other pipelines that are bringing this product from Canada to the United States. In fact, for years, this product's been coming to refineries in the state of Utah, where I'm from, and refined in refineries in North Salt Lake. The most recent of those 5 pipelines that brings this product from Canada was actually approved by the Obama administration in 2009. It brings 800,000 barrels a day from Canada in the United States. And when that project was approved by the Obama administration State Department, the State Department said that the pipeline would, and I quote, send a positive economic signal in a difficult economic period about the future reliability and availability of a portion of United States energy imports. And in the immediate term, this shovel-ready project will provide construction jobs for workers in the United States. Now, when it comes to the Keystone proposal, as it was going through 3 years of environmental review, when discussing this pipeline, Secretary Clinton's coordinator for international energy affairs, David Goldwyn, stated, and I quote, "Balancing jobs and energy security, I think the case for a pipeline is overwhelming, and she will approve it." This is a project that received a lot of scrutiny. It's not a new type of project. 5 other ones come to this country. I know there may be some unique aspects of this specific pipeline proposal, but in general, there are 5 other ones that bring this product to the United States already. This has become a symbol. We can have honest disagreements about what we think about issues, but we should make sure we understand what the facts are about this pipeline. As I said, this product has already come to this country many times. I thank the gentleman again for offering this motion to recommit, and I urge passage. I'll yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Georgia reserves. Gentleman from Kentucky.
At this time, I'd like to yield 4 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Scalise, member of the Energy and Commerce Committee and a real advocate for the Keystone Pipeline.
Gentleman from Louisiana is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank the gentleman from Kentucky for yielding. I want to rise in strong support of the gentleman from Georgia's motion to instruct. This is a strong bipartisan motion that has support not only in the halls of Congress, but also has support amongst the American people as they look at this proposal. Keystone, our friends in Canada, they have vast oil reserves, and they're going to extract those reserves, whether they're used in America or whether they're used in China. And so the question is not whether or not Canada is going to go and explore their oil sands. It's whether or not we get the oil from a friend in Canada, 1 million barrels a day when it's in operation, or we continue to become more reliant on Middle Eastern oil. Oil from countries, in many cases, that use the money that we send, the billions of dollars a day we send to them, against us, against our troops. And we have an opportunity to do many things here. We can help secure America's energy independence by saying that's 1 million barrels a day less that we need to get from Middle Eastern countries who don't like us. We can get it from a friend in Canada, and they want to send it to us. And oh, by the way, it's going to create about 20,000 American jobs up front. There's much more to come. The estimates are even higher long term once the pipeline's in operation. And yet this shouldn't even be a dilemma. It's not controversial to most people. Most people consider it a no-brainer. 20,000 jobs, 1 million barrels a day of oil from a friend in Canada instead of other countries. And yet President Obama has said no. Now, he goes around giving speeches saying he's for all of the above. We've heard it time and time again. He's for all of the above. Maybe he's for all up above, but nothing below. Because if you say no to the Keystone Pipeline, you're not for all of the above energy. You just look at the facts. We've got the opportunity to say yes to something that creates great jobs. And this transportation bill is the perfect place for it because this is infrastructure. We've got pipeline already running all throughout our country. Even if this amendment passes, Mr. Chairman, there's nothing that says that every state has to have the Keystone Pipeline go through it. If there are any environmental issues, each state still has to permit the pipeline if it goes through their state. So each state still has the ability to say, look, we want to make sure the route fits best with our environment. That'll happen anyway, even if it's approved. But if the President rejects Keystone, make no doubt about it, the oil will still be produced in Canada, except it'll be sent to China. And the jobs will be sent to China. And the billions of dollars of private investment This isn't one of those phony stimulus bills where we print a bunch of money we don't have and borrow it from China. This is actually real investment from private sources, and they want to spend those billions of dollars here in America. They want to create those jobs here in America. They want to help ensure our American energy independence right here at home, and the President keeps saying no. It's our opportunity to stand up in a bipartisan way and say something, this is something we all agree upon. Just because some radical environmentalists went and held a big rally over at the White House a few months ago, and literally 3 days later the President said, oh wait, now I'm against Keystone. It's time for us to stand up and do the right thing, stand up for those American jobs, stand up for billions of dollars of private investment, and stand up for American energy security and say yes to the Keystone Pipeline. Strongly support this motion, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Kentucky reserves. The gentleman from California.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased at this time to yield to Mr. Markey from the state of Massachusetts 5 minutes.
The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the gentleman from California. The transportation bill should be about increasing the number of riders on our mass transit system to reduce oil dependence. It should be about increasing the number of riders in HOV lanes to ease commuters' lives and to encourage people to get more energy-efficient vehicles. The transportation bill should not be used as a vehicle to force approval of the Keystone XL export pipeline, because that's what it is. It's an extra-large export pipeline. The American Petroleum Institute ads claim that the Keystone pipeline will deliver oil to power our country. Sounds great, but in fact, there is no legislative guarantee that even a single drop of this oil and fuel from the Keystone export pipeline would stay in the United States for American consumers. When I asked in the hearing the president of the TransCanada Pipeline Company whether he would guarantee that the oil that came from Canada through the entirety of the United States would stay here in the United States, he said, no, I will not give you a guarantee. So let us not hear again from the Republicans about how this is oil for America, because the president of the pipeline would not give us a guarantee that he would keep the oil here in the United States. And why is that? Because the pipeline is going to Port Arthur, Texas. Now, what's so special about Port Arthur, Texas? Well, it just happens to be that it's a tax-free zone. So they're going to bring this pipeline without any environmental safeguards because they just want to approve it themselves, the Congress. And, you know, a congressional expert is an oxymoron. Okay? There is no such thing compared to real environmental experts, real experts in this area. You know, congressional experts like Jumbo Shrimp or Salt Lake City Nightlife. I mean, there is no such thing. And yet they're saying, no, let's approve the pipeline. No environmental safeguards. We'll just move it through. We're experts. We're going to supersede the Environmental Protection Agency and send it to Port Arthur, Texas, and then in Port Arthur, Texas, it's going to get sent. And guess where it's going to get sent? You don't have to be Dick Tracy to figure this out. It's going to be sent to China. It's going to be sent to Latin America. It's going to be sent to Europe, tax-free. By the way, you represent Port Arthur, Texas. You represent any part of Texas. Vote yes on this resolution. But if you come from another state, I'd throw in Louisiana and Oklahoma as well. But if you come from another state, I don't know what you're thinking. I really don't know what you're thinking. You don't have a guarantee on the environment. You don't have a guarantee that the oil is going to stay here in the United States. You're going to accept the canards, the fabrications, the misrepresentations that this is oil for America when no one will put it in the bill. The oil must stay in America. You won't hear the president of the TransCanada or ExxonMobil or Chevron saying the oil is going to stay in America. Let me know where that happens. This is oil that they're going to sell in other parts of the world. And why do they want to do that? Because right now a barrel of oil in the United States is $93 a barrel, and a barrel of oil in Europe is $115 a barrel. You don't have to be a finance major to figure out that they want to sell that oil in the world market. So all we are is just a big conduit for that dirtiest oil in the world coming out of Canada, coming right through the United States without environmental safeguards, going to Port Arthur, Texas, tax-free zone, to send it so that ExxonMobil and the rest of these companies can make a fortune on the global market. Now, is that crazy or what? Why are we debating this right now? And why are we listening to these people at the same time that we export? You know something else we export, ladies and gentlemen? We export our young men and women over to the Middle East in order to protect oil coming into the United States. We should not be exporting young men and women at the expense of domestic oil which we could keep in our own country. That should not be exported, not if more young men and women have to be sent overseas in order to protect the oil lines coming in from the Middle East. That's our greatest vulnerability. So vote no on this resolution. This is a capstone of the Republican majority commitment to the oil industry. It is something that is very consistent with everything that they've done since they took over the majority. But the truth of the matter is that this is just a one-way trip to exotic locations in China and Morocco and Singapore for oil that is going to compromise the environment of the United States and not protect our security one whit. I'm waiting for the first Republican to stand up and accept an amendment which would keep that oil in the United States. It just
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from California reserved. Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time, I'd like to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Kissel.
Gentleman from North Carolina is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my friend and colleague from Georgia for the time, and I rise in full support of his motion to instruct the conferees to support the Keystone Pipeline. A lot of numbers, a lot of facts have been given out. I will not repeat those. I will just cover a couple of points very quickly. We have heard through the past years and even decades, we've talked about energy independence, but yet we haven't gotten that. We have the opportunity to create North American energy independence if we just make a few good decisions. This is one of them. It's time, we've talked about this long enough, it's time to move this pipeline forward into all the benefits that we can receive in jobs, in energy security. It's time. And we've heard a lot of discussions tonight about what the administration might say or Congress might say or the petroleum people and who others, but we haven't heard an opinion for the American working families. Our families are desperate for energy security, for the pricing stability. This is a step towards that. We should not forget at all our American working families, our responsibility to helping them as they struggle to get by in this tough economy. They have to be front and center in this decision. So I encourage my colleagues to vote yes, and I appreciate once again my colleague bringing this motion forward, and I yield back my time.
The gentleman from North Carolina yields back the balance of his time. The gentleman from Georgia reserves the balance of his time. For purposes of the gentleman from Kentucky rise?
Reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Kentucky reserves the balance of his time. What purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
Mr. Speaker, I'd like at this time to yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Cohen.
The gentleman from Tennessee is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you. I appreciate the time, Mr. Speaker. And I rise in opposition to this motion to instruct the conferees. I'm a member of the Transportation Infrastructure Committee, and we would like to see our bill passed. And I represent a city, Memphis, Tennessee, that is the transportation and distribution center of America. Transportation jobs are extremely important to the city of Memphis. It's been 958 days, 9 extensions, nearly 3 years since the last surface transportation bill expired. The Keystone proponents insist this language be in this transportation bill, which is language, if it's anywhere, should be in an energy bill, not a transportation bill. But by doing so, they will end the hopes of transportation workers throughout this country, let alone Memphis, to have a transportation reauthorization bill passed. We will instead have a 10th extension and even more uncertainty in the transportation business. The Senate's made it clear they're not going to accept a bill with the Keystone Pipeline extension, and so has the President of the United States. The same President of the United States who allowed the extension, the southern extension of the Keystone XL to go through.
He's not against pipelines. He's not against oil. But he's against this one because it hasn't gone through the proper processes. And at that time, he'll make a decision pro or con. But it needs to go through the proper processes. So we don't need to defeat the scientific judgment and environmental studies that are necessary before we approve a pipeline. But what's happening is the proponents of the Keystone Pipeline are paying homage to their patron saint. Their patron saint, big oil. What big oil wants, big oil often gets. And it's big oil, not the people of Canada, our friends with the hockey pucks, our friends who have got a long time good relationship with this nation. It's big oil that will make the profit and control the oil. And big oil wants to sell it where they'll make the most profit. There is a greater demand in this world for oil than ever before because of a burgeoning middle class in China and India and other parts of this world where people are starting to get cars and need gas to drive those cars. Because of that, the price of oil has gone up. While the middle class in America has shrunk, the middle class around the world has grown. And they want that oil. And that's where it's going to be sold. It doesn't have to go to Port Arthur, Texas. It go to other places. But it's going to be sold on the international market to where it gets the best price for the oil companies, who are already getting great tax breaks from this Congress. And that won't help the American people one iota. The fact is we need to end our addiction to big oil. We need to get away from fossil fuels. And we need to think about the next generation. James Hansen, a leading NASA climate scientist, has called the pipeline the fuse to the biggest carbon bomb on the planet. Game over. Give up. Future generations, forget the flora and the fauna. Forget what we've known in the past. But the real issue, besides that, is this is just not relevant and pertinent to this bill. What's important is that we pass a reauthorization bill that builds our highways, improves our transportation system, gets more people into buses, finds alternative forms of energy, have bike lanes and encourage people to get around without burning fossil fuels, and get our transportation bill passed and put people to work. It's the best thing we could do for the economy is to pass the bill. And the conferee's suggestion that the Keystone Pipeline be kept alive as an issue just keeps the passage of this bill further down the road, keeps American workers unemployed, keeps commerce stalled. We need to not approve this recommendation. I ask us to vote no. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from California reserves the balance of his time. For purposes, gentleman from Georgia, right?
Yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, some have said that because we are inextricably part of a world market, because we consume more than we produce of this vital commodity, and that therefore we cannot legislate ourselves an island in this process, and that since we both produce and consume and produce and export, that therefore it follows from that that virtually anything we can get, any new source of conventional energy that we get is going to be a mere conduit, a pass-through to somebody else and lost to us. I'd like to point out that we produce in this country some 12 million barrels a day. We export some 2.9 to 3 million barrels a day, so there's both oil being produced in this country and exported for a net annual production on a daily basis of 8.8. It does not follow from that any new sources of energy that we get are going to flow right through this country someplace else. In fact, a study commissioned by the Department of Energy addressed the dynamic effect of limiting our access to unconventional sources of this energy in Canada and allowing that energy to go someplace else. And a study compiled for the Department of Energy pointed out the perverse effect of this would be if we deny ourselves access to this new source of Canadian oil, what will happen is it will go to other countries, and who will fill the gap? Middle Eastern and African OPEC countries will actually increase their shipments to this country. We'll become more dependent upon imports from folks that we don't want to rely upon if we deny ourselves access to those folks we do want to rely upon. In the words of the study commissioned for the Department of Energy, they would displace the Canadian oil crudes would be lost to the U.S. market and then go instead to Asia. They would displace the world's balancing crudes, Middle Eastern and African predominantly OPEC grades, which would in turn move to the USA. The net effect would be substantially higher U.S. dependence on crude oils from those sources, the sources we want to wean ourselves off of. Finally, along this line, it's been said that because we're describing conditions in ordinary terms, when the markets are working as we hope they will and as they should, we need to remember, we need to bear in mind, there's always the possibility the world market will fail us. I'm old enough to remember a time in this country's history when we were embargoed, first in 1973. Because we came to the aid of our ally Israel in response to the Yom Kippur War. We were embargoed by the OPEC oil countries. Folks who supply a little more than a third of our imports today, at that time, cut us off completely. It happened before. It did happen again in 1979. We were embargoed a second time in the same decade. We need to bear in mind that while we're concerned about market conditions and the ebb and flow of product and consumption in ordinary times, we also have to gird ourselves for the possibility that we can be embargoed by our current vendors. And against that backdrop, access to North American oil in time of emergency can have a far greater impact on our economic and national security at that time than the conditions we're talking about and arguing about now in the ordinary course of events. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Kentucky rise?
I would like to reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Kentucky reserves the balance of his time.
Mr. Speaker, may I inquire how much time each side has?
The gentleman from California has 5 minutes. The gentleman from Georgia, 8.5 minutes. And the gentleman from Kentucky, 8 minutes.
Yes. Before I recognize and yield to Mr. Rush from Illinois, I just want to make the comment that we need to get ourselves off dependence on oil, whether it's from the United States or overseas. And if we go along with this pipeline, we're increasing our dependence on a very, very dirty oil that is going to use up a lot of carbon just to be able to get it in a state where it can be sent down that pipeline. I'm pleased now to recognize the ranking member and hopefully next chairman of the Energy Subcommittee, Mr. Rush from Illinois, for 3 minutes.
The gentleman from Illinois is recognized for 3 minutes.
I want to thank the ranking member of the full committee for recognizing me. Mr. Speaker, I rise in opposition to this motion to instruct a mandatory approval of the Keystone XL pipeline does not belong in our transportation bill. This provision jeopardizes the entire transportation bill and all the American jobs that the transportation bill will provide and produce. Mr. Speaker, the southern portion of the Keystone XL pipeline from Oklahoma to the Gulf is already moving forward with the President's support. But the northern portion does not yet have a final route through the state of Nebraska. President Obama has made it clear that he will not short-circuit the normal approval process and deprive the American people of their opportunity, their right for input just to benefit a foreign company and foreign interests. As it stands now, it is very unclear if this project would benefit the hard-pressed communities of this nation, such as the one that I represent, with jobs and contracts and other economic opportunities that we have been hearing so much about, that has been bandied about by the proponents of this pipeline. We desperately need jobs and contracts and economic opportunities, but we have no guarantees that this XL pipeline will produce the same. So regardless of whether you believe this pipeline will be, should be built or not, including the Keystone XL pipeline approval, mandatory approval, I might add, in the transportation bill, which the President has already promised that he would veto, may not necessarily further the pipeline, but it may doom the entire transportation bill. If you care about jobs, American jobs, then the #1 priority should be passing the transportation bill all by itself. Pass the transportation bill to create and preserve American jobs for the American people, not burdening the job-producing transportation bill with extraneous gimmicks and extraneous gestures. Passage of this motion to instruct will be a stumbling stone for Keystone.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from California reserves the balance of his time. What purpose does the gentleman from Kentucky rise?
Yes. May I ask who has the right to close?